Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you 5 tips for making super unique, high quality Serum presets. I'm making this video as part of the process of putting together a few Serum banks that are going to be available later this month, so stay tuned for that video. Serum is an amazing synth that has become a staple for electronic music. Released in 2014, for a long time it was the only synth of its caliber, and it wasn't until recently that we've seen competitors like Vital and Pigments. Other wavetable synths like Massive or Silent provide a lot of the same functionality, but Serum's unique interface made it to this day one of the easiest and fastest synths to program. The first person to really give rise to Serum's popularity was deadmau5, who had already been working with the creator of Serum, Steve Duda, who released music under the name BSOD. Then of course, people like Virtual Riot and Skrillex incorporated it into their sound and made Serum the heavyweight of EDM that we know today. Flash forward to 2023 and now we see Serum all over rap production, with artists like Yeat and Carson rapping over this dirty synth aesthetic. We're already past the rise of rage beats, with Trippie Redd making a whole album based off Miss the Rage, which of course used heavy EDM and dubstep sound design. So for the Serum banks I'm working on, my goal is to capture the sound of underground rap with my own unique take on the sounds. I've been developing this sound incorporating gritty dubstep basses and leads, but in a trap context. I'll show you a few examples before we get into sound design. So that's the kind of sound we're going to be going for today, and that brings us to the first tip: adding effects. These tips are going to start simple and get more complicated as we go along, so hopefully there will be something for everyone in this video. So Serum is a wavetable synthesizer with built-in effects. When you get Serum, it comes with a separate VST that only loads the effects, so you can process any audio track with them as well. These effects are what gives Serum its signature sound, on top of the wavetable editing options. If you don't know what wavetable synthesis is, basically it allows you to choose a series of wave shapes to play on each oscillator, and scroll through those shapes with the position knob. I've got it set to basic shapes right now, which only has simple waveforms, but Serum gives you access to a ton of crazy wavetables and allows you to import audio files to make your own. I'm sticking with basic shapes for now, and I'm going to pick my favorite one, the triangle wave. So the only change I'm going to make to this sound is to bring down the sustain so we have a shorter, plucky sound. And then we're going to go straight to the effects section to make our patch. A lot of the sounds I'm working on use bit crushing at one step or another, so we're going to start with that. If I turn on the distortion, there's a bunch of different options for distortion types. I'm going to pick downsample, which will give us that bit crush effect. If I play lower down, we get that classic video game bass sound. The next effect I'm going to use is EQ. I could use the filter for this, but the filter in the effects section doesn't have visual feedback, and we'll dive deep into Serum's filters later in the video. So this is just a simple 2-band EQ, but in the context of Serum, it becomes a really powerful sound design tool. Why? Because of modulation. I can grab our LFO and drag it onto the cutoff of our low band. I'll set it to a low cut, and just like that, we've got a sweeping filter that moves with the LFO. I'll change the shape of our LFO down here to something more interesting. I'll set the rate to 4 bars so we have a 4-bar loop that moves the filter and write out a short bass line. Now we have this. And that's just a triangle wave with 2 effects. The most unique effect in Serum is the hyper dimension. There are other effects that replicate the dimension expander, but hyper is pretty unique to Serum. It splits the sound into multiple voices and detunes them much like a chorus, but it sounds unlike any chorus I've ever heard. Check out how it makes this bass sound super wide. Dimension is a more subtle effect. Think of it kind of like a slapback delay. You can use this to add width without changing the sound too much. One more effect I'll add is the compressor. Serum's compressor has a multiband setting which replicates the famous sound of OTT. The default setting is a little aggressive on our bass, but I'll bring down the ratio and mix to taste. I'm done with this patch, but I'll go through the rest of the effects quickly. You've got a chorus, which sounds alright, and for some reason includes a low pass filter. Delay and reverb, these are pretty standard. The reverb sounds very metallic and digital. The flanger and phaser, these can add some additional movement to your sound. And finally the filter, which we'll get to later. The next tip is going to be modulation. You already saw me make that filter sweep, but here are some more examples of what to modulate and why. First of all, the main envelope controls the volume of the sound. Envelopes have attack, decay, sustain, and release, which shape the sound. Plucky or punchy sounds will have a short attack, short decay, and a low sustain. Key sounds usually have this unique shape with a medium, decay, sustain, and release time. Bass sounds can be long and sustained or short like an 808. For our modulation example, I'm going to make a sustained chord patch. Let's start with our basic triangle again, but this time I'm going to layer a second oscillator. I'll pick some weird wavetable from the digital folder. I'm going to spread that second oscillator out with the unison and adjust the detune. So we've got a mono bass and a wide top layer. Now I'll send them both to the filter section, and this is one of the things I'll modulate. The filter section is another thing that makes Serum unique. There's a ton of options for filters, including some really crazy effects. For now, I'll use a basic analog low pass. The reason I say analog is because Serum's filters are based on analog synths. Check this out, if I bring the mix down with the resonance up, I get this weird shape that creates an interesting phasing effect. I'll assign our LFO to the cutoff and make another interesting shape. I'll go 1 bar this time, so our filter moves on the 2 and 4. I'll also add modulation to the wavetable position of our second oscillator. I'll add a slow LFO that gradually moves the position up and down, so we get a slow modulation through the different harmonics. I'll also choose a different wavetable so we get some more results. I'll add one more element using the noise oscillator. This is basically a sampler with pretty limited controls, but I'm specifically interested in this phase knob. The phase knob controls the position of sample playback. If you turn the phase up, it starts the sample at a later point. Since we have a sample of looping white noise, this doesn't do anything unless we move it while it's playing. Then all of a sudden we get these weird pitch bends that sound kind of lasery, and I really like incorporating them into my patches. I'll put the same 2 and 4 LFO on the phase, and now we've got this cool layer on top of our chords. The last thing I'll modulate is the master pitch. I hope you're starting to see how powerful modulation in Serum is. I don't have Shaperbox, so something I've been doing in my patches is trying to recreate some of the effects you can get with Shaperbox inside of Serum. One of the easiest things to replicate is a tape stop. All we need is to set our LFO shape like this, and adjust the curves so they barely touch the edges. You can hold Alt to adjust all curves in an LFO. Now we can assign this to the master pitch in the Matrix tab. This also shows all of the modulations in your patch, and you can adjust them all quickly. We'll drag in our new LFO, then choose Destination, Global, Master Tune. Set the modulation to unipolar and bring the amount down. We can choose how often the tape stop triggers with the rate. I'll choose 1 bar. Now we've got a really dynamic patch without any effects. Real quick, if you're enjoying this video, feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying what you'd like to see next. On to tip number 3, and we're finally gonna get into the filter section. At first glance, you might not think Serum's filter section is anything special, but the more you dig into it, the more it has to offer. Right away, you'll notice that there are a ton of options, including 4 categories of filter types. Normal is the extent that most other synths have, with high pass, low pass, and band pass filters, as well as peak and notch at 12 or 24 dB slopes. But even these are a little different because of the drive and fat knobs down here. Serum's filters have this really nice saturation built in, and you can get a lot of mileage out of the filter drive. The fat knob accentuates the area around the cutoff and adds some more analog character. The multi-filters are what makes Serum amazing for dubstep growls and basses. Using the low notch filter gives you 2 cutoff values that can be automated separately, and can give you some cool vowel-y sounds. I'm using LFO 1 to push the low cut and notch in opposite directions, which gives us this sound. Flanges has flanger and phaser effects, as well as comb filters that can add sharp metallic resonances to your sound. I'll start with a wavetable that has a lot of harmonics like a saw wave. If I send it through one of these comb filters, we get this metallic bass sound. By enabling key tracking, the filter will follow with the notes we play, so it keeps the melodic content. Finally, there's this miscellaneous section, and this is where the filter section really gets crazy. Sample and hold will give you a bit crushing effect in the filter. There's also a ring mod effect in case you want that. Then there's the combs, all passes, and reverb filters that Serum is famous for. These add tons of crazy resonances, and you can make super heavy dubstep or rhythm basses with this sound. There's also a couple formant filters which I've been using to add this vowel sound to some chord and bass patches. My tip for the filter section is to utilize the second filter in the effects section. It's identical except for the key tracking and visual feedback, but having two filters in Serum is really useful for a lot of sounds. For example, say I use the first filter on sample and hold, but then I want a high cut later to take out some of those harsh frequencies. By using the second filter, I free up the EQ to do some of that weird modulation stuff we did earlier. The filter can do so much, it's really the most powerful effect in Serum. Tip number 4 is going to be layering oscillators. You have 2 oscillators in Serum, technically 4 if you count the noise in sub, and I'm going to be showing you some interesting ways to use them. One of the most powerful features in Serum is the unison. It layers up to 16 voices per oscillator and makes them super wide and huge sounding. This is great, but it can easily make your sounds thin and washed out in a full mix. So I'll show you how you can combine both oscillators to get some really wide and full sounds. So before we used a triangle wave for our bass and a digital wavetable for our wide top layer. This time I'll use a saw wave in both oscillators. Our bass layer will just be a single voice, but our top layer will be spread out to an even number. An even number of unison means there's no voice in the center, so it will layer nicely with our mono bottom layer. I'll turn down the detune and adjust the random knob. The random knob randomizes the phase of each voice. This is really important when using unison because it determines the width and character of the sound. At full random, the sound is fully wide and we get this big unison sound. But if we bring it down, we start to get phasing, and at 1 or 0, we start to get this cool lasery sound. I'll leave it around 20%. By the way, there are settings in the global section that change the unison algorithm, and I encourage you to mess around with these to try out some different sounds. Another thing you can do with layering oscillators is to mess with the fine pitch. If you detune one of the oscillators slightly, you get the effect called beating, where you can see the sound dipping up and down in volume. If you run these detuned sounds through distortion, you start to get some really interesting effects. I'll use our filter as a bit crushing effect to add some more distortion. This patch is sounding really cool. The last tip is going to be about warp modes. Each oscillator can be manipulated using one of these warp effects. If we click here, we can see all the different options. These all manipulate the wavetable directly and can do a lot to shape the sound. I'll start with some classic synth effects. PWM stands for pulse width modulation and gives this nasal sort of pinch to the sound. Sync increases the rate of the wavetable, adding tons of higher harmonics. Bend and asymmetric are pretty unique effects that shape the wavetable in different ways. Flip and mirror literally flip and mirror the wavetable and sound really strange. Remap allows you to draw a custom shape that will add the corresponding harmonics when you turn it up. Honestly, this one's a little complicated for me and I haven't used it a lot. My favorite warp mode is Quantize, which is yet another bit crushing effect in Serum that affects the wavetable directly. Let's use Quantize on a sine wave to make a textured lead sound. The last few warp modes are how you use FM, or frequency modulation, inside Serum. FM uses one oscillator to modulate the pitch of another oscillator. This results in adding harmonics and can be used in a lot of ways. I'll set our first oscillator to a triangle wave and we'll use our sub oscillator to modify it. Go into the warp modes and choose FM from sub oscillator. I'll pick a dense waveform like a square wave, turn down the level, and turn up the FM amount. This gives us this squelchy effect. If we lower the octave on the sub oscillator, it lowers the rate of the FM, which starts to get this gritty sound. You can go all the way down to make this texture that I used in a few lead sounds. AM and RM are some other ways to cross-modulate between oscillators. AM stands for amplitude modulation. Let's take our second oscillator and choose AM from A. I'll turn it up and now we've got a modulated signal modulating our second oscillator. This gets you a really unique, dirty sound. So there you have it, 5 tips for making really cool, unique Serum presets. If you want to see more stuff like this or about other plugins or production techniques, leave a comment down below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!